Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Bill, I've been doing this show for, I don't know, 5 years now. I think I might have finally figured out my lighting. I have this really bright light, and at my house, which I occasionally tape from, I have some real lights that I bought. But here I use this, it's actually a light that's for people who get like seasonal affected disorder, whatever it's called. So you're supposed to look into it. It's supposed to make you happy like in the winter, but it's really bright. And it's never made me look good, but I didn't know what to do. I've tried everything. And I just put like a cloth over it. And as long as that doesn't catch fire, and I figure it's about a 10-15% chance it does, something smells burning. I think I may look really, the lighting actually may be right, finally, for the first time.
I can see. There's a glow that wasn't there before. I think I will be even more persuaded by your conservative insights than I ever have previously. So I might be at a disadvantage today.
Well, don't mock this. It's like the Kennedy-Nixon debate in 1960. Looking good matters. And sounding good. I cannot tell you, I've been having my own little podcast for years. I have spent so much time trying to get the sound right. And it has been a wide range of diversity in terms of the quality of the sound on my podcast. And it took me years to get it semi-professional sounding. And even now, occasionally, episodes do not turn out as I hoped.
But we have much has transpired since we talked last. Before we talked, there wasn't a terrorist attack in France. There wasn't a refugee controversy, and we hadn't seen Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio be so ferocious towards each other. So I don't know where you want to begin today.
Well, let's go ahead and start with Cruz and Rubio, as I find it very interesting. I think it's interesting that Cruz, if you remember the most recent Republican debate, which was on Fox Business, as I recall, Cruz intentionally did not attack Rubio. He had a chance. He talked about amnesty. He talked about sugar subsidies, but given the chance, he did not attack Rubio. And then within, 24 hours or so, he started attacking him. I wonder, why not do it face-to-face? And it's funny because yesterday Ted Cruz said, why doesn't Barack Obama say that to my face? Well, why didn't Ted Cruz, given the chance, say it to Rubio's face?
Well, those things go both ways. Cruz had these sort of glancing blows to Rubio, not by name, and where the sugar subsidies, it was probably lost on most of the audience that he's even talking about Rubio at that moment. But Rubio, who after Jeb Bush took a swipe at him, saying, "I'm not running against anybody. I'm going to be above the fray. I'm going to take on Hillary Clinton. I'm not going to get down the muck and attack fellow Republicans." His people have been pumping out all this oppo on Cruz, trying to say Cruz is actually a secret defender of amnesty, and that their positions aren't the same. And where does Cruz really stand on
that was
the 100 million document that are here? He's not doing it in Cruz's face either. Both guys shied away from a face-to-face confrontation, but almost in the immediate aftermath of the debate, their teams have really been ramping up, and the next debate's not until mid-December.
Yeah.
This one would presume that we are leading to a face-to-face confrontation soon enough.
This will sound childish because it is childish, but Cruz started it. So my point is that Cruz didn't attack Rubio in the debate when he could have. The next day, Cruz started launching attacks on Rubio, and then Rubio started counterpunching, and then finally, now Rubio's come out and attacked Cruz sort of unprovoked on NSA stuff. But I think it's fair to say Cruz started it, and I think it's also fair to say that this is a very interesting fight to look out for, and a lot of us think that this may end up being what becomes like the Super Bowl, right? Magically somehow, and we don't know how, but magically Trump will fall, Carson already seems to have fallen a little bit, and then Cruz and Rubio emerge as the champions of their respective divisions within the Republican Party.
And you have suggested that this is the fight that many in the party have been waiting for, that the two up-and-comers, young, fresh faces, but with distinctly different models of success, models of how they envision the future of the Republican Party. Cruz being sort of the ultimate hardliner, and Rubio being the younger, more optimistic, potentially more majoritarian, with more appeal to the swing. How do you feel that battle is shaping up as you see the initial skirmishing? Does one have a more obvious leg up either with the Republican base or with the public at large? Because polling-wise, Cruz and Rubio are kind of in the same place right now nationally. But do you see in the arguments being leveled back and forth, do you feel one has the upper hand?
No, I think it's close. I think Rubio's slightly ahead, but I think that there's just so many variables that it's really hard to game out who would win. There is sort of conventional wisdom that if Trump gets out, Cruz benefits, but numbers don't really bear that out. There's a theory that Cruz ought to do really well in Iowa because of his sort of evangelical outreach, but again, the numbers don't really bear that out. There's just so many variables. I mean, what happens if Jeb gets out, which is entirely possible that Jeb gets out in December, let's say. Does that support go to Rubio? I don't know, but I would say that I think that they both represent the division within the Republican Party right now, where you have on one side Marco Rubio representing a kind of more optimistic Jack Kemp cosmopolitan conservatism as advocated in Too Dumb to Fail, and on the other side you have a more populist, nationalist, angry form of conservatism in the form of Ted Cruz, derided and Too Dumb to Fail. So that would be a stark contrast, but I would say that if you're going to have that fight, and it seems like a good fight to have, it seems like a defining fight within the GOP, I'd rather have it between Cruz and Rubio, two kind of young Hispanic U.S. senators, than say Trump and Jeb. So I think that this is if that's the clash that has to happen, this is a healthier clash. And then the last thing I would say is, as much as I think that Cruz has really sort of campaigned and so far served in the Senate as sort of a demagogue, I think that the guy is so utterly flexible that it would not surprise me if he flipped and ran as a very responsible sort of mainstream Republican conservative candidate in the general election. This is a guy who worked in the George W. Bush administration, who's married to a Goldman Sachs executive, and I would not be utterly, and has shown that he's incredibly calculating and smart and flexible. And so I think it's possible that Cruz would get the nomination and then would sort of all of a sudden run to the center a little bit in the general election.
Well, that's what Reagan did. Reagan certainly modulated when he had to win election. But I'm curious because the way you laid out the battle, the populist, angry conservative versus the optimistic, policy-oriented conservative. I don't feel that's the way Rubio is framing that fight. Cruz is going at Rubio as you would expect. He was for amnesty. He hasn't done anything. Cruz. You see this. There's a super PAC, Courageous Conservatives, that's backing Cruz, that has an ad out saying, "What has Rubio done? All he did was he betrayed us and fought for amnesty." Ted Cruz has actually stopped things. Cruz stopped the amnesty bill. Cruz stopped the gun control bill. Cruz has led and Rubio hasn't. Rubio, his tack on Cruz is a phony. He's telling you he's against amnesty, but he really isn't, because he said in the course of that discussion that he would expand the visa program, that the 11 million would stay here. He just isn't. I mean, the Rubio people don't spell this out, but what Cruz was saying was he's against the citizenship path. So he was against the Gang of Eight bill. He's okay with them staying so long as they don't have citizenship. That's basically what the Cruz position was. Now Cruz is not quite being that clear about that.
Let me just say something real quick about that, just to sort of editorialize real quick. This is an interesting thing, and there are a lot of smart people who advocate for that. But in a way, it is a form of amnesty. Because you would not be deporting people. They would be allowed to stay. What you would be potentially doing are two things. Number one, there would be a danger of creating second-class citizens. And so you'd have people like in France, for example, who do not become assimilated because presumably voting, the ability to vote would be one of the things that would make you have it part of an ownership society where you would be invested and you would be a full-fledged citizen. By making you something other, there's a theory that you'd be even less likely that you would assimilate, which of course is conservatives should want assimilation, should be a big thing. The other thing is politically, I think it keeps the issue alive. So if conservatives decide for legalization, what they've done is basically allow Democrats to demagogue the issue. They could, it doesn't go away. They could keep saying they've created these second-class citizens. They won't. I'm sure we could get a sob story. This is Jose Martinez, and he has lived here for 50 years, but Republicans don't want him to be able to vote. That sort of thing. So I'm not saying it's a deal breaker or it's a horrible idea, but I do think that there are potentially unintended consequences that you could certainly argue that having a pathway to citizenship, one that does require jumping over some pretty big obstacles, is a more conservative and sort of more salutary outcome than the legalizing option.
Well, I agree with you, but that's not the way Rubio is. Rubio's not debating those finer points of policy. He's trying to neutralize the immigration issue by blurring the distinctions between him and Cruz. And by the way, Cruz isn't being straight with you what he actually believes in. So I don't feel like Rubio is clarifying the battle lines the way you did earlier. So it's not. So you're not having an optimism versus angry debate. And I also question the strategic logic of what Rubio is doing because, one, I think it's pretty hard to convince conservatives who have seen Cruz as the ultimate conservative warrior for 2 years to suddenly be told, oh, by the way, you were confused when you watched him do all that filibustering and shutdowning. He wasn't really being all that conservative, by the way. I don't think that's gonna compute with people. And then it just puts more spotlight on immigration, which is Rubio's weakest place right now. I mean, he has a very hard time explaining, why he was for a bill they voted for and then he abandoned it. You'd think he'd want to get onto other subjects and not focus on immigration so much. And I think he went out of his way to launch this. I mean, granted, Cruz is poking at him, but he could have gone at Cruz in a myriad of ways. He'd have to try to take him down on immigration of all things.
Yeah, I actually disagree with you on that. First, in terms of Rubio, the strategy of not saying what I said, I think Rubio for the next 3 or 4 months is going to have to do what he's going to have to do. I think we know where these two guys are in terms of where their heart's at, but the reason Rubio is a better politician and has a better chance of actually being a force for good is that he's better at this stuff than Jeb Bush and Kasich, and he's kind of willing to do what he needs to do, which is to attack people. And I think he's muddying the waters right now which I think is smart. In other words, it's not a clean shot. You can't say Cruz is the perfect conservative on immigration and Rubio is the bad guy. No, because it's a really shades of gray. Even if you're a hardcore Tea Party conservative, all of these guys have been or are for amnesty by the definition of the most sort of strict, definition. And so I think that I think he's muddying the waters, but I don't think I think it's actually fair to do. I think the waters are more muddied. He's not allowing Cruz to get away with being I wear the white hat, he wears the black hat. No, they're actually.
It's so easy for Cruz to just turn around and say, "You voted for amnesty, I voted against it. You worked with Obama, I fought Obama. You flinched when my good work in whipping up opposition to the bill was coming to a head. You flip-flopped and came over to my side. I led, you followed." I mean, it doesn't seem that hard an argument to make.
And yet, the waters are not that clear, are they? They are muddy. I think Rubio is a very good counterpuncher, and I think the reason Cruz didn't attack Rubio in that debate is that he was afraid, because Rubio has proven there is a price to be paid. If you come at me, I will come back. And I think it was David Drucker from the Washington Examiner who said Rubio's strategy is, you pull a knife, I pull the gun. You put one of us in the hospital, we put one of you in the morgue. I mean, Rubio has proven that he will retaliate immediately and harshly. And look, I think that that matters. That the framing of you voted for this, I voted against it doesn't stick if Rubio spins around and goes, "Oh yeah, well guess what? You were for amnesty too. You put in an amendment that would legalize 11 million illegal aliens. Oh, and guess what? Now you're saying that you didn't believe it at the time back then. I've got a quote here. I could read it. You said that this is not a poison pill, that you really believe in it." So my point is, I think Rubio is really good at that in a way that Kasich and Jeb, frankly, are not. And so that's why Rubio is kind of this great hope, is that not only is he, philosophically correct, but he's also tough enough to fight back when people try to make him look like a wimp. What's the Bill Clinton line? And I don't want to imply that Rubio is wrong, but I think the line is true, which is better to be strong and wrong than right and weak. I think that you've got to be tough, and that's what sets Rubio apart in this instance.
Well, and that path is analogous to the Obama-Clinton path. Obama, the young upstart, against Clinton, the battle-tested warrior. Obama doesn't flinch, stares her down, shows to the public, you don't have to worry about me in a general election. I can take it, I can dish it out right here and now, so I can handle it, going forward. And certainly the Clinton campaign didn't go easy on Obama. They threw everything they had at him, and he was able to withstand it and turn it back around. So if Rubio does as you say, he would triumph and be hard to beat going forward. There's another scenario, which I think I alluded to in the past show. We talked a lot about my theory that Jeb is analogous to John Kerry 04. Kerry, when he was in the wilderness in November and December of 2003, sat back while Howard Dean and Richard Gephardt went to town on each other. And Gephardt essentially led the murder-suicide operation, which took them both down. Gephardt was polling very well in Iowa for much of the race, being from neighboring Missouri, and it was only in December where he destroyed himself, but took Dean down with him, and Kerry then snuck through. So Cruz and Rubio, who I think both have weaknesses, they both could just amplify each other's weaknesses, while Jeb is left unscathed for the next 6 to 8 weeks, and then breaks out in mid-January. And again, I don't necessarily assume he would take Iowa, because Iowa is very hospitable to hard-right social conservatives. New Hampshire is more likely where Jeb would make his first play. But you could see both Cruz and Rubio being mortally wounded by going at each other so hard and fast right now.
Sounds arousing. Let me just say that I object to your use of the term the wilderness, because that's the title of McKay Coppin's new book. Instead of that, pre-order Too Dumb to Fail, or you could pre-order both, or you could order both. But anyway, so I object on several grounds to that. Okay, I guess we got to talk a little bit about the horrific attacks in Paris that happened last week after we taped. And, I mean, a lot's been said about it, but I think that there obviously are political, we're now at the point, I think, where we can talk about some of the potential political repercussions. Interestingly, Donald Trump is doing well because I think he's perceived as tough. Ben Carson not doing as well, I think, because he is perceived as not as tough. So the lack of knowledge and experience presumably hurts Carson more. The other thing would be
they both have lack of knowledge.
Yes.
No one is leading foreign policy seminars right now over there. But whereas Carson does an interview and is asked, well, what country would you call first? And he can't answer that question.
Well,
Trump
also
goes out and gives a speech.
The former CIA agent / advisor who's like, yeah, he can't really comprehend any of this. And then Armstrong Williams, Carson's top aide, talks about how, he's got a long way to go in his learning curve. And, it's like, please quit helping me, folks,
Right. But all Trump is doing in the aftermath is giving speeches where he says, I'm going to bomb the blank out of ISIS. That's the sophistication of the Trump foreign policy.
There's that, which I think does play well, but there's even more.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that is the distinction there. It's not a question of policy depth; it's a question of bluster.
Well, I agree. I think that's the distinction. So the lack of foreign policy experience and knowledge hurts much more if you're perceived as weak than if you're perceived as tough. But Trump, here's something I'm saying from hotair.com. Trump won't rule out special ID / warrantless searches for Muslims. So he's also playing not just the sort of anti-ISIS card, but also the Muslim card, and of course
he's saying he's going to shut down mosques.
Shut down mosques, and then this also plays into the whole controversy over refugees, which I think has been really dominating the headlines for days now. The last thing I'll say is George Will has a piece in the Washington Post, and I assume in a syndicated column, saying that Christie might get a second look now. I have no evidence of this, but I feel like Jeb could potentially benefit slightly from the focus now being more on seriousness and looking for an adult.
Well, Jeb gave a very strong foreign policy speech in South Carolina yesterday, and I got the Politico said Jeb is probably commanding the room. He's got a speech coach, and that's helping him with his presentation. But there was more foreign policy detail in that speech, and again, I don't think people are paying that much attention to Jeb right now because he's in the Netherlands. He's in a black hole somewhere. But I think he's definitely sort of sharpening that posture of, look, I am prepared to step into this role while these guys, have their squabbles. I'm going to stay focused on the big picture. So I think the Trump bluster only gets you so far. I always maintain once we get closer to actual voting, that kind of talk is not going to be seen as very electable, even by Republican primary voters. But it certainly recalibrates the race. I mean, this is what happened with Howard Dean in 2003. Once Saddam got captured, people looked at him differently and said, you know what, I'm not so sure you're who I want to go up against George W. Bush right now. Carson seems uncomfortable talking about the subject. Bernie Sanders has the same issue on the left. Not that I think he was having a tough time anyway. But when he pivoted away from a foreign policy question right at the top of the Saturday debate, lends this extra layer of doubt. You're not you don't want to talk about this, even though it's what's on top of my mind right now.
I also
and Trump
think,
at least wants to talk about it, even if it's in a completely ridiculous and offensive way. He speaks to the conservative base, and he's willing to rush headlong into the subject when it's on people's minds.
I also think, honestly, what happened was, for like a long time, they'd be like in a debate, and they would go to Ben Carson and would ask him a question, and he would give like a ridiculous answer that was a complete non sequitur. But it was like, I can't tell if, as the moderator, you're like, I can't tell if he's stupid or if he's so intelligent it's just over my head. Okay, Ted Cruz, next question to you. The easiest thing would just be to move on. Like, he'd be like, the fish running and jump over, you know what I mean? And you're like, okay, Ted Cruz, But I think finally, like, they've quit sort of giving him that pass, and now when he says something that's like pablum, they're doing follow-up questions. And I go back, Bill, to a theory you and I have had for a long time, which is that Fox News is the biggest danger to Republican candidates. Ben Carson was on Chris Wallace's show, Fox, what's it called? Anyway, Fox News Sunday. And I thought Wallace grilled him. And I actually thought some of it was a little over the top, to be honest with you. Like he was trying to go after Carson.
We saw Wallace do that with Marco Rubio on the Iraq War question back in May.
Rubio is so much better prepared to handle that. I felt bad for
blood,
Carson.
He bores in.
I felt bad for Ben Carson, Bill.
Well, feeling bad for a candidate.
I know. I shouldn't.
Not a ticket to success. But as much as let me ask you, how much do you think the Syrian refugee question really matters? You're seeing almost all the candidates say, don't let him in. Bush and Cruz have a slight wrinkle. They say, let the Christian ones in, not the other ones. And the Democrats all say we should let them in. My sense of it is that this is sort of like an Ebola panic where it gets you hot and bothered for, a few weeks, but the issue the question of ISIS could well linger on depending on how our response to this point forward goes. But the refugee question, I would imagine, would fade. Now, where it wouldn't fade is in Louisiana, where that gubernatorial runoff is Saturday, and Edwards is on the verge of running away with it over Vitter. And now, after Edwards made a comment that was kind of equivocal, I want to work with the federal government to assist with refugees and keep our people safe, which really doesn't quite say exactly what. I mean, the bottom line is actually governors can't do anything about refugees. Governors cannot stop the federal government from bringing refugees. They have zero role to play whatsoever. So what Edwards is saying is just sort of, an obvious thing. I will talk to the federal government and see what we can do here. And Vitter is using that to say you're soft on refugees. I would not let them in. You're clearly insinuating you're welcoming them, and I would not. So I don't think it is happening so late in the game. We can't really see if that would change the polling or not before Saturday. Maybe a fluke poll will come out, but it's so fresh that you probably wouldn't be able to rely on those numbers. So we don't know if this is going to change the race in Louisiana or not. I would not think it would do much for the Republican presidential primary because they're all basically on the same page, and the issue will probably fade by January or February. Yeah,
I think politically speaking, you're right, but I think that it's a big, big deal because I feel like this speaks to the sort of the nativist, angry populist thing that I really don't like in the Republican Party. This reinforces that. I think President Obama, very inappropriately, is playing politics with this as well, with the way he's framing it, and trying to make Republicans look bad and look uncompassionate and inhumane. I really see this. I think this is a complex issue, and I think that it's wrong of Obama to to basically say there's no threat here, and if you think there is, you're a horrible bigot. And I think or you just don't care about little kids and moms. I also think it's wrong to say, screw them. I ultimately think that there's a real tension here. I mean, I think America has to be a beacon of hope. I think that our values are that we, help people who are struggling. Ironically, the Statue of Liberty given to us by France says it all. But I think those values are competing with not insane or absurd concerns about terrorists coming in as refugees, and also concerns about the next generation, like the Tsarnievs. The parents were fine, but their children were radicalized. So I think I think this is a tough one. And the people who say, maybe we could let the women and children in, but not men who are of military fighting age, because that's just statistically speaking where the problems come from. Or maybe we should, why don't we just establish a safe zone in Syria where we keep the refugees? Those are not horrible. Those are not crazy things to suggest. So it really bothers me that both sides are sort of playing politics with this, and that they're representing the other side's views in the worst possible way. This is really a troubling issue to me. And as someone who cares about restoring the conservative brand and the Republican brand, the long-term impact of this is just one more potential example that would show that Republicans are angry, nativist, fear-mongering. I don't think that's true, but I think Obama wants that to be the takeaway.
Well, politically speaking, I mean, the polling that has come out shows wide opposition to accepting refugees. So Obama's playing the we can politically. Now, Obama's on the ballot, so he doesn't have to worry about that sort of thing. But the knee-jerk impulse, and clearly this is not just conservatives, is keep refugees out.
Right.
And the Washington Post had a piece noting that this actually bedeviled Bill Clinton in his first gubernatorial term in the late 70s, when Castro put a whole bunch of Cuban criminals and mentally ill on boats and shipped them to the U.S. to poke at us, and Carter was trying to follow our basic just follow our procedures when people come to our shores. How do you process those applicants for asylum? And some of them were in Arkansas, and Clinton was kind of opposing Carter and kind of not opposing Carter, and he wasn't being as adamantly opposed as some wanted, and that contributed to his defeat of his one of the only elections he ever lost. So I mean, I think there's something deep seated when it comes to refugees. Yeah. Which is probably why Obama didn't want to accept a whole bunch in the first place, because he's only accepting 10,000 out of the 4 million that are out there. But at the same time, I think he wants to be able to signal to the global community, we're going to do our share, and you should therefore do your share. And so since he's being so brutally attacked on the subject, I mean, what else can he do if he doesn't fight back in some way? Does that send a bad signal to the allies who he's saying, I want you guys to accept even more than we are? If I'm not even going to stand up for myself when they're attacking me, how can I expect you to do the same?
Well, look, I think in fairness to Bill Clinton, what Castro did was obviously much more intentional and egregious than what's happening with the Syrian refugees. I mean, in the sense that it was intentional versus well, anyway,
people choosing to flee on their own because they don't want to die. I don't want to get myself
into a John Kerry type situation here, where I say something stupid by trying to explain something about the legitimate comment or whatever about the Charlie Hebdo. The other point I would make, though, Bill, I agree with you. In the short term, this does benefit Republicans, in the sense that I think the public is with them and being very skeptical about refugees. But I think in the long term, which is what I'm more focused on, is the long term impact of things, and I think that's the long term game Obama's playing, is to reinforce the notion that the Republicans are the party of angry nativist old white people. So that's sort of my concern. But man, I mean, this is a very, very serious thing. And I really, it's just the old stupid line, I feel strongly both ways, but I kind of do. I mean, I you know, and I think was the House is trying to pass or passed a bill, which some people see as it's bad because they were trying to return to like regular order and they had to rush this bill through. And some people think it's just a stalling tactic. But I think the head of the Department of Homeland Security has to sign off on every refugee. That doesn't sound like a crazy thing to me. And maybe that's the compromise to get this done.
But there already is heavy screening. I mean, that's the thing.
Heavy screening, but this is a little heavier. let's ramp it up to 11.
I mean, I think the issue that Obama has with the House bill that's trying to tighten those screws is they're saying that you're creating a procedure that's just not logistically possible to do. It might sound good in a talking point, but it's just not. You'll never process anybody. And we already have a procedure here. We're not just letting them in without checking people out. It actually takes a couple of years. It's actually quite laborious before people can come in here. And so that's sort of getting lost in the. But to have that conversation, to have a low temperature conversation. Okay, here is what we currently do. Let us explore if there are weaknesses in that process that can be fixed.
Right.
And if so, let's take care of them. But to have it coming out of panic when we don't even have an actual example of a terrorist posing as a refugee coming into the States. I mean, even all we know is that there was a passport at the France attacks. We don't even know the circumstances of that passport yet.
My point, no, that's true. But my point is, okay, first of all, it only takes one terrorist to kill us. You know what I'm saying? Like, they can be, the vast majority of the people coming from Syria could be great folks who are going to like assimilate and whatever. It only takes one oversight to blow us up. So potentially. So like number one.
That's true. That's true on a whole score of fronts. I mean, there was one domestic terrorist that used to be in the military. I obviously don't say we shouldn't let people come back home from the military after they fight in wars,
Okay. But so I think that's one way of looking at it. But what not to sort of play like the last honest guy in Washington or whatever card, but I do feel like some Republican candidates have been playing politics with this by, let's take Donald Trump, for example, by trying to sort of out-nativist everyone and play on that. And then I think Obama has been playing politics with this by, while abroad, casting Republicans with a pretty broad brush, as sort of uncaring and uncompassionate.
But he singled Cruz out.
No, he didn't.
Which is interesting.
I don't think he actually did. I think the implication was Cruz. I don't think he called him out by name. I could be wrong.
Okay.
But anyway, be that as it may, everybody knew he was talking about Cruz in that instance. But my point would be, like, really what should happen is, and again, this is like naive, but instead of like, Cruz and Trump playing politics and Obama playing politics, to actually come together. Now I'm sounding like Ron Fournier, but to actually responsibly say, look, if I'm Obama, I'm saying, look, I think you guys have a legitimate concern. Like, but on the other hand, we really have to take care of, like, what if this was your wife? What if these were your children and you were fleeing? This in the case of Cruz, I mean, his dad literally did flee. Cuba, right? And so it's not that hard to imagine, like, what if, and so let's find a way. Like, if you guys look, I think the precautions are appropriate now. let's add another, what is it, like the Hanes underwear, like Inspector 12, It's already passed 11 quality inspections, but let's bring in Inspector 12 to make sure. Do you remember that commercial, Bill? You're probably old enough. Circa 1986, Inspector 12, whatever. Like, just if it makes you guys feel happy, if it gets this done, then we'll do this. Maybe let's give, I'll say it, maybe we should give some preferential treatment to Christians fleeing Syria, in as much as they're probably more likely to be killed if they stick around. I don't know. Whatever. Let's cut a deal. Let's cut a deal. Let's save as many lives as we can here. What do you guys want? Let's make a deal. Nobody does that anymore, right?
Well, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the House bill actually is not as extreme as what some people on the campaign trail are saying right now. But, Obama doesn't really have to play ball. I mean, he has the power to do what he wants to do on refugees. He can most likely veto whatever comes his way. I mean, if the Congress is mustering a veto-proof majority, it's another story. But so long as he has a third plus of Congress on his side, he also doesn't have to worry about re-election. Doesn't have to worry about Congress. He doesn't have to have that negotiation, and he can assume I'm not going to hurt Hillary here because this is all going to blow over. By the bigger issue is just actually executing the policy on countering ISIS, and the bigger question how to resolve the Syria conundrum. I think there's a tendency in presidential campaign politics to be very knee-jerk when it comes to foreign policy. We'll be knee-jerk about a lot of things. You see it with Mitt Romney and the jobs numbers, for example, and not thinking through that there are so many ways things can develop that you can't predict, that you don't really want to plant your flag somewhere that's going to look foolish 6 months down the road. Things look terrible now in Syria and with ISIS, but things can change in a matter of months. So I think it's why a candidate like Hillary Clinton tends to be very circumspect about things and doesn't want to say too much, being around the block and knowing that fact. And there's obviously a lot of pressure on a candidate to be definitive all the time. But you might think with Republicans, that they got burned on Benghazi in 2012. They got burned on harping on jobs numbers in 2012. That maybe it makes a little more sense to take a breather and wait to see how
God
things
forbid,
happen.
God forbid if there is, and it could be like a Boston Marathon type thing. But if there is, God forbid, a Syrian refugee who does something horrible, I don't know what the fallout might be politically. And you could argue that Republicans, if you're just playing politics, and I don't advocate that, but if you are, you could argue that Republicans are in the better position for that reason, because of that hopefully a very, very remote possibility.
But you could be, as a candidate, you could be silent about that, and if that horrible thing did happen, you could then complain about it then. There's not that much benefit like predicting the awfulness. There's plenty of political hay to be made after awful things happen. You could just wait to see if the awful thing happens. You don't have to prognosticate.
No, but I mean, Republicans have staked out the turf that says this is caution, this is a danger that we're going to potentially allow terrorists in amongst the flood of refugees. So they've staked out the turf. Democrats seem, although there's some defections, including the mayor of Richmond, who endorsed Hillary Clinton, who I think wants to set up internment camps. There are some defections, but the Democrats, I think the perception is that they, send everybody over. And so, presumably, there would be some political fallout from that. I don't know.
We could leave it there. Is there anything else that you want to get into before we wrap things up?
I think we're. I think this is not a topic I wanted to really talk about, but we had to. I mean, I haven't written anything about it. I've not talked about it on TV. I have not written about it. the refugee thing, because I really feel I really can identify with both arguments very strongly, and so anyway, we had it here, and I hope that that it lives up to DMZ standards.
Well, I think you handled your internal conflict in true DMC fashion.
Excellent. So on a lighter note, you had something in RCP this week that got a little traction.
No, I need to do an RCP piece for over the weekend. You know, I didn't produce that much of note this week. You know, the last big thing was the Jeb Carey piece last week.
Cool. All right, buddy. Well, good seeing you, good talking, and we'll see you all back here next week in the DMZ.
We got to talk about Thanksgiving. We got to figure out our Thanksgiving schedule.
Yeah, weigh in the comments, folks. What do you want? Special episode? Are we allowed to take a week off? What do you think? What should we do? Let us know, and then we'll meet with the suits. We'll go into DMZ headquarters and to Blogging Heads headquarters with the Bobs, and hash out the plan. So, all right, guys. Thanks, Bill.
Take care.